Welcome to the Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow. Opened in 1912 and named for Tsar Alexander III, the museum's tumultuous history traces that of Russia in the last century. After the revolution, Soviet authorities renamed the museum for a different Alexander, Pushkin, poet, playwright, and literary hero. The museum's 700,000 objects give us a singular portrait of cultures from around the world, as seen by the generations of Russian curators who assembled the collection. One of those cultures is that of the Jews, and this is the focus of our visit. But we won't be looking at Jewish culture in Russia. Instead, we'll be looking at the museum's collection from Egypt, and from an era when Jews lived and thrived there, although they weren't supposed to be there at all. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. And a mixed multitude went up with them, and large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. The book of Exodus, known in Hebrew as Shmot, tells the story of the central event in Jewish history, the journey of Hebrew slaves out of Egypt to freedom in the land of Israel. The date of the Exodus is sometimes placed around 1470 BCE, sometimes 2 or 3 centuries later. The truth is, historians don't know when it happened or if it really happened at all. But Jewish tradition has no doubt that it did, and the story is told every year at Passover. For millennia, Jews have defined themselves as a people who left Egypt. So why do they keep popping up there? The high priest comes and stands next to his bull a second time and places his 2 hands upon it and confesses he would receive its blood in a bowl and give it to the one who stirs it, and entered the sanctuary to burn the incense. This is a Hebrew description of ritual at the temple in Jerusalem. It seems to be recounting the service on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. A detailed account of these rituals can also be found in the Mishnah, the compendium of Jewish law and lore, in a section called Tractate Yoma. In the week leading up to Yom Kippur, we learn, the high priest would isolate himself in a special room to study. The night before, he wouldn't sleep. In the morning, he'd bathe, change into white garments, and offer a bull as a sacrifice for his sins. In Jewish history, the construction of the temple was the culmination of the march of the Israelites out of bondage. They'd come from the land of the pharaohs, from the house of slaves, to become a free people and to worship their own God in their own capital. Jerusalem was the opposite of Egypt, but the text we just read, which describes the temple, it comes from Egypt. The Papyrus fragment surfaced in Alexandria in the winter of 1888. It reached the Pushkin collection thanks to the great Russian Egyptologist and collector Vladimir Golenishev. Golenishev spent years in Egypt, eventually holding the chair in Egyptology at the University of Cairo. He didn't take a particular interest in Jewish artifacts, but this papyrus caught his eye and he bought it from an antiquities dealer. The papyrus is about 1,500 years old, dating to the 6th or 7th century CE. This was perhaps 2,000 years after the Exodus was supposed to have taken place. The temple itself had been destroyed by Rome about 500 years before, after which many Jews found themselves back in Egypt. There were Jews living up and down the Nile at this time. According to a count by one modern scholar, more than 90 communities from Alexandria in the north all the way to Aswan in the south. When the papyrus was written in Egypt by an unknown Hebrew scribe, the temple was long gone, but the memory of it hadn't disappeared. On the contrary, Jewish scholars made great efforts to preserve the ritual, known as the Avodah, in a body of writing that only expanded as years went by. This writing tried to transport readers back to a time when the temple was the focal point of the divine presence, and to prepare for its eventual reconstruction. The temple service inspired many liturgical poems known as piyutim, which were recited in synagogue, including synagogues in Egypt. Some of these were discovered in the historical treasure trove known as the Cairo Geniza, a repository for old texts, which was used by local Jews for centuries and then discovered by scholars in the late 1800s. Piyutim dedicated to the temple ritual sometimes start with the story of creation, then follow the history of Israel through the consecration of Aaron as the first high priest in the desert after the Israelites fled Egypt. The composers of these poems can't have been oblivious to the irony of the fact that they were writing them in Egypt. We don't know whether this text is a piyut. It doesn't quite align with the text of the Bible, the Mishnah, or with other liturgical poems on the same topic. We can only speculate that it might be an excerpt from an unknown piyut, or perhaps from an even older liturgical poem that was directly based on the text from the Mishnah. What we do know is that this text from Egypt was part of the thriving Jewish life of the country, which saw Jews pray, fight, and write for thousands of years long after the Exodus, from the time of the pharaohs through the Middle Ages and into the modern era, up until the 1960s, when Middle Eastern war and politics finally put an end to the story of the Jews of Egypt, at least for now.